Welcome back, everyone. Lecture number 2 in our post-spring break 2020 online version of our class. It's taken me a hot minute to actually make these videos. I anticipate that I will be using these in the future. So if you are watching these after spring of 2020, just realize that these were made in a pretty short period of time, and there's some references to what is going on in the world today as far as the impact of the coronavirus on us and having to transition and do everything online. I'll probably make some references into that. So just keep that in mind if you're watching this in the future. After my last video, my wife watched the video and she said, Jason, that's what she calls me. She said, I know what shirt you had on, and I know as well as you do that's an indoor t-shirt. Even if you put a suit coat on over it, it is still an indoor t-shirt. And even though you didn't leave the house to make the video, you're leaving the house virtually, so you need to put on somewhat of a dress shirt. So yeah, we're getting slightly more professional, very slightly. All right, so today for our lecture on stress, I thought we would go to Colorado. Hopefully you have read the packet. If you haven't, stop this video, read the packet. Hopefully you've watched the YouTube link that I sent when I sent out the packet. If you haven't, watch that. It's people that are much smarter than me talking about this stuff in a little bit different way. But I hope that you'll see the similarities in the lecture. What I want to do today is kind of give you just some very high level points from each of the theories and each of the things I kind of hit on in the packet. I love talking about this, but every time I do a lecture on it, it's much like the team stuff. The students get lost because it becomes very theoretical. So in the handout, I gave you a lot of sort of theory, but try to water it down a little bit. But there's a real application for the theory, but you have to understand the theory, and you have to use all the theories, I think, together at once. Much like with the motivation section. You don't just look at one theory, you just don't take that at lock, stock, and barrel. You consider it with everything else that's going on. Hopefully this is very straightforward in the handout, but not all stress is bad. Some stress is good. We call this eustress. Some stress is needed. The video noted the point is not to get rid of stress, the point is to get the right kind of stress. I think it was Sapolsky that said that. When we don't have any stress, quite frankly, we don't have a lot of motivation to do anything. So we need just a little bit of stress to get us motivated to start action. Okay. So for those of you that are procrastinators, my perception on this is, I mean, I don't know, maybe some of you are just lazy, but I don't think that most procrastinators, self-proclaimed procrastinators, are really all that lazy. What it is they just don't perform until they feel that stress. I mean, like, that's what you say if you were procrastinating. My good students that are self-admitted procrastinators say, yeah, actually, I just do my best work when I feel a little bit of that pressure. Well, what you're saying is, when I have no stress, I just am not motivated at all. I have to have a little bit of stress to get that eustress. Still want that eustress. Move all your deadlines up. It doesn't matter what they are, move them all up. This positive stress, this motivating stress, we have a name for this. We call this eustress. This is the sort of stress that we want. However, it's an inverted U relationship. As stress goes up, performance goes up to a point. And then as stress continues to go out, performance starts to drop down. And that negative aspect, we refer to that oftentimes as strain. And more importantly, we talk about the consequences of chronic strain, where employees are constantly at that place where they feel overstressed, okay? They'll say, I'm stressed out, this sort of thing. When people are chronically strained, they actually have a lot of health repercussion. The video that I sent you very clearly talks about this. But bad things happen. It taxes your body unnecessarily, and your body's just not set up to be taxed like that for an extended period of time. Well, this also has ramifications for organizations. When their employees are unhealthy, there's a cost associated with that. More absenteeism, higher turnover rates, things like accident rates go up. Why? Because people just don't have as much mental attention and focus. Another thing that ends up happening when employees are chronically strained is they also, sometimes, not always, maladaptive coping mechanism. Increases in smoking, increases in drinking, increases in drug use, increases in caffeine use, Things that in excess probably do not lend themselves to long, healthy lives. Another thing that starts to happen is sleep starts to go. And there's two basic reasons for this. Is number one, when I'm overtaxed, one of the reasons is oftentimes because I have things to do. So one of the things that starts to go is my sleep. I'll just shave, a couple hours off my sleep and work a couple more hours. The other thing that happens is, I'm sure you guys have experienced this, is you put your head down to go to sleep and your mind is just spinning. And so you can't actually fall asleep. And there's some real implications for not sleeping. You're more susceptible to sickness, your body needs the sleep to recoup and kind of recover. I do want to point out, and I think this is important, especially for you all as college students, but the sleep research, people that study sleep, note that 7 to 9 hours is pretty much the standard in the sleep research studies, that this is the optimal amount of sleep to get. I've heard executives say before, well, I just work all the time, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, the reality is, if you don't sleep, you're going to die earlier. Now, it's a bell curve, right? It's a distribution. It's not everyone. But on the whole, we need a lot of sleep. And what's interesting is there's some studies that have looked at how long you have to stay up, like consecutively, before your cognitive ability starts to diminish. And it's actually not that long. Something like being up for like 20 hours. At that point, your cognitive abilities start to taper off. So think about that. Another negative thing that happens when we have employees that are chronically strained is, if this persists for a long period of time, usually we end up with employees that are burnt out. And burnt out is characterized by several things, but emotional exhaustion, complete depersonalization at work. It is a bad place. It's just a bad place for our employees to be, because they're at work, but they're not at work. You've probably seen people that are burnt out in their job before. And yeah, they're going through the motions, they're getting their basic tasks done, but there's no fire, there's no passion. It's very clear they're not going to go above and beyond. The problem with burnout is, when people get to that stage, it's pretty hard to get them back. A lot of times what happens in organizations, I believe, is that your good employees that are burnt out will leave, and your bad employees that are burnt out end up staying because they can't leave, because they're not really that good. So it's a situation where you have to address it, otherwise you're paying this employee, or you have to get rid of them, or, and a lot of times they're really good employees. There's just some reason why they've been chronically strained, and they're just burnt out on the whole situation, okay? There's a general theme that we start to see with stress, in that ambiguity causes stress. Think about when you have been the most stressed in your life. Probably a lot of that stress stems from an unknowing. You don't know what's going to happen, so you're thinking about it. Sometimes you may be catastrophizing about it. Think about the situation we're in right now. If you're experiencing a little bit of stress, probably a lot of that has to do with the unknown. The transactional theory, the job demands job control, and the conservation of resources. And I want to be clear, I am covering these theories in part. I'm giving a very, very watered down view of them. So the transactional theory, what I think is important for this theory, for our discussion, for practically how to help employees manage stress and how to manage our own stress. When people start down this stress process, there's new stimuli. This situation is a perfect example. When all this news starts to come out about Corona, this starts a psychological process in us, a stress response. Transactional theory of stress basically notes that, well, in humans, what ends up happening is that we do a series of cognitive appraisals before we actually hit the point of strain, right? The bad stress. And so in the first appraisal, we just are assessing the situation, we're assessing the new stimulus, and we're saying, is this new situation, is this new stimulus, is it benign? That is, okay, this is different, but I got this, it's no big deal. Or is it a challenge? That is, yeah, this is something different, but this is kind of exciting, this is kind of new, kind of looking forward to kind of tackling this. Or this has the potential to be negative, and in which case we call that a stressor. Oftentimes it has to do with, this is threatening something. This is threatening my identity. This is threatening my potential to reach goals. If people say this is benign during that cognitive appraisal, and be aware, people oftentimes don't sit down and think about this. This is subconscious, it's happening very quick. If we are deliberate about it, maybe it's a little bit slower, but oftentimes this is happening like this, and we are not even aware that we're making this assessment. But if people decide that the situation is benign, that is, this is different, but there's no real impact, they just go on. The stress process kind of shuts down. If they determine that it's challenge, then what people do is they experience eustress. They do things like they start mobilizing their resources, whether that's strategies, whether that's tangible resources, getting support, tangible resources like money, whatever the situation is. But they start doing something. And again, that's that positive stress, the motivating stress, the stress that, yeah, it's there, but it's forcing us to doing it. It's pushing us to do something. If people determine that this new situation or the stimulus is potential threat or a stressor, then what we do is we go on to the secondary appraisal. And in the secondary appraisal, people ask themselves, can I cope with this situation? That is, okay, initially this is not good, but on a second sort of step, all right, is it possible that I can deal with this? Okay, not that I'm looking forward to it, not that this is potentially exciting. This is going to be a struggle, but I have resources in place. But I have a plan in place. But yeah, this is going to be a tough 2 months because I'm overworked, but through tax season, and things are going to slow down. It is only if during that secondary appraisal, people say, no, I can't cope with this, that we get the negative aspects of strain. Basically what the job demand, job control model says is that as demands go up, stress goes up. But we can moderate that relationship, or we can change that relationship with job control. It's a little more complex than this, but there's the main thing that I want you guys to know from this sort of idea is that control becomes important. In the workplace, oftentimes what this means is giving people autonomy and allowing autonomy for people that have efficacy. So this idea is people can actually handle more demands if you give them some autonomy to decide how they're actually going to handle that demands. But there has to be an element also that the person believes that they can actually do the things. If we're in a situation where we don't have efficacy, sometimes giving people more control can actually give them more stress. So we just have to think about that whenever we're dealing with employees. We need to control the workflow so that workers aren't overly taxed. But also there's this element of, hey, with things that you are comfortable with and you know how to do well, I'm going to give you some decision power. I'm going to give you some autonomy. I'm going to give you some flexibility on, you make up the due dates. Here's the final due date. The check-in points, you make that call. And then on the flip side of that, we also have to manage and watch when we are looking at giving control. We have to make sure that the person is able to handle the control. The conservation of resources. Conservation of resource, there's a lot of writing on it. So let's just talk about what resources can mean. So for one thing, we can have tangible resources. You have a car, you have a house, you have money, you have assets. Another thing that I'm more interested in is you have cognitive and emotional resources. I think of those resources in terms of energies. At any one time, we have a finite amount of cognitive and emotional resources. So think about this. At any one time, you only have so much energy to give. You only have so much mental power that you can think for one setting. You only have so much emotion that you can give in one setting. And here's what's interesting. Just start playing around with this idea. The body really can't tell the difference between when you are using cognitive resources, emotional resources, or physical resources. So think about this. Our body's just kind of in tune. Have you ever had a situation where you've taken an exam and you've walked out of that exam and you are physically tired? The reason that is what you've done is you've burned up a lot of cognitive resources, and your body just feels it that I'm being drained, right? I'm being drained of my energies. I'm being drained of my resources. Another example, if you've ever been in a very, very emotional argument with somebody that you really care about, okay, like your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, somebody that your friend, somebody you're in a relationship with, And towards the end of that interaction, you're just thinking, I have nothing left to give. Like, I'm just exhausted right now. Physically, I need a nap, okay? Again, you're using emotional resources, but your body just knows that it's being drained. So think about that. We have these cognitive resources, we have these emotional resources, we have these physical energies, and they're all sort of intertwined. And because of that, anytime we're doing anything, we're using resources. Think of it in terms of a resource tank. Okay, you have basically like a glass. And as you can see, our resource tank is completely full when we're well rested. But whenever we do stuff, we use resources. And what happens is our tank gets more and more depleted, more and more depleted. Everything we do, we use resources. I wake up in the morning, I have my resource tank full. I wake up, I get out of bed, I use some resources. I use a little bit more as I drive to work. I use more as I work. And then I go home, I have meaningful interactions with my friends and family, do activities that I like, and I replenish resources. So I burn cognitive and emotional resources in everything I do pretty much. And psychologically meaningful interactions or events help replenish my resources. When people's resource tank is constantly low, we're at risk for burnout.
Dr. Stoner, can you give us an example of a cognitively meaningful event or experience?
So I'll give you an example. I wake up, I do my stuff, I take care of things around the house, I'm burning resources the entire time. I go in and I teach class. Whether you guys recognize it or not, for me, that burns a ton of resources. Like, I'm physically tired when I get done with a day of teaching. And I'm just standing up there talking. But I have these moments, and they don't happen very often, if I'm honest. I think it's an unrealistic expectation that these are going to happen often. But I have these moments when I'm lecturing about something, and I literally can see the light go off in somebody's head. I don't always know what it is, but I can just tell that I said something while I was lecturing that had an impact on somebody's life. I have those replenishes my resources. And so I want to talk about the application of this stuff. I want to do this from two different perspectives. I want to do it from a manager or leader's perspective, and I also want to do it as an individual perspective. I want to start, though, by taking all of that theory that I covered in the video and I covered in the packet to kind of just lay out some assumptions. Number one, ambiguity stresses people out. Number two, a sense of control is important, not just for the situation that's stressing people out, but a sense of control internally just helps people cope with stress better in general. Number three, it's okay that people are stressed and they feel a little bit of stress. What we really have to be attuned to is when people psychologically make a shift from this is difficult to I just can't handle this. We really don't want to make that psychological shift. 4, cognitive positioning is important. Whenever we look at stress interventions, things like repositioning the way we think about situations and our emotional responses to those tend to be pretty effective. Thinking about something that we initially perceive as a stressor, as a challenge, can help us deal with stress. And the last thing, number 5, we have a limited amount of resources, that we can't assume that people have a resource tank for work and a resource tank for home, that these things are intertwined, and we have to be attuned to this and allow people, and if any way possible, facilitate situations that people can replenish their resource tank. Okay, so how would I apply this in this current situation if I was a manager? Number 1, I'd start with the perceptions of the resource tank. People have a limited amount of resources. That resource tank is not exclusive for work. They are dealing with a whole host of issues right now. So I have to be attuned to that. I'm running an organization, I'm managing a unit in an organization. I have things I have to get done for work, but I can't just assume that because I have a level of urgency that other people don't have other priorities, life concerns in this situation that I can't be attuned to. Number 2, ambiguity stresses people out. So one of the things I would do if I was a manager in this situation is I would be talking to my people right now as much as possible, as much as they need. Because what I think that they are going to be stressed out about is the ambiguity of this big situation. At a very basic level, how am I going to do my job so I can make sure I work so that I can pay bills if this is an extended sort of thing that we're dealing with? I would be very clear with the people about when I don't know. I think that when dealing with employees in these stressful situations, there's some areas where there's going to be some ambiguity that possibly I can clarify and reduce that ambiguity. There are other areas where I have ambiguity and I just don't know, but I would be in contact with the people where I don't have solutions. I would be asking them for, what do you think would be a good solution? Which goes to point number 3, control is important. I would include people where I don't, or the company doesn't already have solutions in a place. I would include them in the discussion about how are we going to deal with work arrangements in alternative ways so that they feel included, they feel like they have some control over the process. The other thing is I would start thinking about alternative work arrangements, obviously telecommuting, but I would even think of it beyond that to help employees deal with the stress. So telecommuting sounds great, but think about situations where people are telecommuting, but now their kids are also home and they have little kids that need attention. So the idea that when I wake up, hey, I can just go to work because I'm at home, well, that just doesn't work. So maybe things like, okay, I'm going to allow you to telecommute and I'm going to allow you a little more flexibility as far as the hours. I understand that there's going to be some asynchronicity as far as deliverables and this sort of thing. They feel like they have some control. Support is important. I would make sure that my employees know that I am there for them. I would listen to them. I would err on the side of not giving too many proactive solutions unless people are looking for solutions. The other thing I would do is I would be very attuned to, when I'm talking to employees, for something in the language that signifies they've made that mental jump from, this is stressful, I can't handle it. Things like, this is impossible, I don't know if I can handle this. I would be very attuned to that. And what I would do is, as soon as possible in that conversation, possibly even interrupting them, but I probably would not do that. As soon as possible in the conversation, negate that. And I would negate it by saying, something like, I understand this is going to be tough. I know we don't have the solutions in place, but we're going to get through this. And so you have to have that optimistic, resilient mindset so that we don't cross over into that secondary cognitive appraisal, the negative aspect of, I just can't handle this. So how do we use this information at an individual level? Control is important. Ambiguity causes people stress. And the ambiguity, this is a tough one. So one more thing on the employer as a manager. The other thing I would do is I would really try to focus on positioning the situation is it's a stressor, right? But think of it and try to help employees position it as a challenge. And that's not easy to do. But I'll use myself as an example here. Is for me this is stressful. Like, I don't enjoy this really. I enjoy interacting. I enjoy getting up and doing the classroom. This is way more work for me to do these videos than to prep a class that I'm going to do live. But the way I keep thinking about this and what kind of keeps me going and helps me manage my stress level is, online is just, regardless of what's going on right now, this is just something that's becoming more and more prevalent. And at some point, I'm going to have to adapt to that. So this is an opportunity, really, that just kind of forces me into that adaptation, where, quite honestly, I have a little bit of freedom to play around with it, to get the strategy right. I as I said in the packet, that's a little bit of a mental sleight of hand. Okay, do I really believe that every day? No, but I tell myself that just to manage the stress so I don't get overwhelmed, that, hey, this is a safe situation to practice something that I needed to do anyways. So it's a challenge, but it's something that's a positive in the end. Okay, so let's talk about it at the individual level, and actually I'm going to start with that. And if you're not in the mood for this, don't watch this now, watch it later. Okay, because this is, we talked about stress or social support earlier, and you have to be willing to receive, proactive advice. And if you're not there right now and you don't want this, then you can shut this off. This is what my practical advice for us in this situation, you all in this situation, one way to think about this situation. I think that it's critically important to think of this not as a negative thing, which it is, but think of it as a positive challenge. Go with me here. This is not going to be easy. That is my prediction, is that we are going to be in for some kind of tough times. But I really keep looking at it from this perspective that when we survive this, which we are going to, okay, mentally we are going to be better off. We are going to be more resilient. If you look at the research on resilience and people that are resilient and what makes individuals resilient, part of that is going through adversity, going through tough situations where there, quite frankly, is a lot of uncertainty. Surviving that, I watch a lot of survival shows because I like these reality shows. And I've always thought that, going out in the wilderness for a month, that would be horrible. But there's a mental fortitude that these people probably come back with that helps them in their everyday life. Like when things are rough at work, in 10 years, you can think, I understand things are chaotic and our internal internet system just crashed at work. This is nothing. You remember back in 2020 when we had that corona pandemic and we all couldn't leave our houses for 3 months? Okay, so I really think of it in this, is that I'm daily reposition this whenever my mind starts to go to a negative, this is tough place, is that there's going to be a positive that comes out of this. Likewise, I think that it is important to have a purpose and routine in your daily life as we continue to go through this. Things are very disrupted and there's a lot of ambiguity, and we know ambiguity stresses people out. And by having a routine of normality, that reduces some momentary ambiguity. Okay, it doesn't eliminate the big picture of we don't know what's going to happen right now, but it does reduce that momentary, just I have time to sit there and think, and well, no, I know what I'm doing next. I have control over the situation. There's not ambiguity over what's going to happen next. Number 3, I would say, is something that keeps you mentally focused and a purpose, quite frankly, really is going to become important just to mentally occupy our time. The other thing I think is important is to remember that we have to be attuned to our resource tank, and we have to do things, and even in tough moments, to replenish our mental resources. I think that having something to do is important. Another thing I think is important is to remain optimistic, have a sense of hope. And again, even if it's mental sleight of hand, even if in moments you don't really believe it, but to tell yourself it's going to be okay, we're going to survive this, I'm going to get through this. The reason being, when we have things like a locus of control or a sense of control, when we have things like a general sense of optimism, there's other things that come as a result of that. So when I'm generally optimistic, when I have hope, or when I have a sense of resilience, I usually am a little bit more proactive with how I'm going to try to resolve a situation than if I have more of a fatalistic perspective, which I might just say, hey, I'm going to give up. So you can think of it, we talked about efficacy kind of in this way. There's a lot of things that come into play with just our mental state, the way we perceive the situation. And I guess that's kind of my main thing with this stress stuff is, stress is a perception thing. I think that for me, having outlets that allow me to experience flow states is critically important to replenish psychological resources. Let's think about the application in even a little bit more specific of an example. And that is you all dealing with the school situation. For some of you, this probably is a little bit of a stressful situation. Well, let's think about that. Let's back it up, think about it from a theoretical perspective. Well, part of why you're probably experiencing some stress is because of the ambiguity that is involved with this situation. We've never been in a situation like this before. You, up to this point, have had a pretty good idea about how to do your classes, how to thrive in a college setting. Well, that situation is totally different. There's some ambiguity there. What I would encourage you to do to try to minimize this stress is think about some of the things that you can control. So we can't do anything about the fact that we can't meet. What you can do is you can actually influence and have some control over how much you communicate with your professors. You can be proactive, you can reach out, you can do things like talk to other people in your networks, use social support, ask them how they're dealing with it. I assume that for some of you, you're feeling a little bit of stress because you're feeling a little bit of overwhelmedness. Before we went on break, you had a pretty good idea about how the semester was going to end and what you had to do and how much effort was going to be required to do those things. Well, now all of that's up in the air. Deliverables are probably changing, time frames are probably changing, and so you have a little bit of anxiety about how am I going to be able to get all of this stuff done just so I can finish out the semester, so I can pass my classes, so I can maintain the GPA that I want. Again, there's a lot of ambiguity in the situation. And if we break it down to assess where do we have control and where can we take back control, we can reduce a little bit of that negative stress. So let's reduce some of that ambiguity and let's take back some of that control. So the first thing that I would do if I were you is I would make sure I had a clear idea about all of the deliverables for the courses that I'm currently taking. Contact your professors, try to, if there's any ambiguity, what is going on here? Okay, so let's talk about how to reduce some of that ambiguity and take back a sense of control. So the first thing I would do is figure out what are all the deliverables that are due in all of my courses. I would make a big list. Here, deliverable 1, deliverable 2, deliverable 3, deliverable 4. Group project, exam, paper, class 1. Have all the due dates down for those. And just by doing it, it gives us a mental perspective as far as, okay, I have a plan as action as far as here are the things that I have to get done. Then we take each one of those things and say, what are the various tasks that have to be done in order to get that deliverable accomplished by the due date? You look at each task, you estimate how much time it takes, you overestimate the time a little bit, you count backwards. You basically, if you've taken a project management course, you use basic project management to manage the stress in this process. What this does is, at a very small sense, it gives us control because we understand that we have a plan in place for how to accomplish the task. It prevents us from shifting from this is stressful to I just can't handle this. Likewise, once you have that timeline sort of built out for the semester, the next thing I would strongly encourage you to take back some control and reduce some ambiguity is, like I said, get a routine in place, a daily routine. I'm going to wake up by 10, I'm going to be in the books by 11, I'm going to work on project 1 from 11 to 12, I'm going to work from project 2 from 12 to noon, or I'm going to work from 11 to 8 for this week. I'm going to work on this project until this project gets done. But build out some sort of regular, this is how I'm getting work done on a daily basis, this is the end goal that I'm working towards over the end of the semester. And by just having sort of that schematic, kind of an outline for how we're going to get this stuff done, really does help manage our stress. I keep coming back to this, but cognitive positioning is important when it comes to stress. And so even though this seems like not that great of a situation, or as far as school, we got to think about, well, what are the potential opportunities here? And even as students, right, there's a lot of things that, we thought the rest of the spring semester was going to play out a certain way. Well, it's not. So how can we turn that from a potential negative into a potential positive?